very vivid memory the very first time I saw my father cry. We were in a church meeting and he'd been called out to take a phone call, and he came back in, and with tears running down his face, he slowly walked up the steps up onto the platform and just about managed to get out the words to tell us as a community that HT20 Mayor, at that time the leader of the churches in Iran where I was born and raised, had been taken by the government and brutally murdered. It was one of those defining moments in time, my sudden awareness, my sudden awakening as a child to the world in some of its shades of darkest black and grey. I wish I could say it was the last moment of its kind in my life, or even the most impactful or the most dramatic. But the sad truth of the matter is that it's not. Injustice and suffering are so ingrained in our world. Generation to generation, there are those who raise their voice, who spend their energies, sometimes their lives, in an attempt to turn the tide. And perhaps our generation, with some of the advances in modern technology, the amount of resource that we have and information sharing, maybe more than ever, we're alive to some of the challenges, some of the battles, increasingly conscious of the inequalities, the oppressions, and yet no amount of railing against it seems to unlock some kind of just utopian land. Injustice remains. And of course there are the macro level issues, global structures and systems, corruptions and incompetence, inequality, the abuse of power at the mass scale, but no less poignant, sometimes no less painful. For every person sitting here, you'll have your own story and your own journey, and for some of you, you may be carrying very deep and maybe very personal, very private pain. What do we do with injustice? How do we make sense of our world and the mess that it is in? The perniciousness, the persistence, the scale and scope of the injustice all around us and in our own stories. And I guess at least part of what I'm asking is, what do we do about our own victimhood? How do we make sense of the fact that some are wronged by others, hurt, broken down, bruised, exploited by others? Where do we go with that? And does God in the picture make any difference? It's been so overquoted it has ceased to shock, but I've been remembering again Richard Dawkins writing in the book River Out of Eden. The universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is a bottom: no design, no purpose, you've all heard it before, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. It's hard to read that again with any consciousness of real pain and injustice and to believe that he could be serious, but of course he is. A consistent, intellectually consistent atheism tells us that there is nothing intrinsically, inherently, innately right or wrong, just or unjust. Good and evil are just social constructs on which our equally constructed notions of justice are built. A pick-and-choose morality that one society, one age might take up and another just as easily lay down. I don't know what image will capture this for you, but I know I will never forget the moment where I saw the image, that picture of that little Turkish boy drowned at sea, washed up on shore, his crumpled little body face down in the sand. ISIS on the one hand, a living hell, displacing, destructing tens of thousands of people, and on the other, an international community just watching, either unable or unwilling to be of any significant help. I have begun to wonder whether it isn't the case that we have to kill off part of our humanity to deny that there are intrinsic evils in the mix. Will there ever be justice? And where will it come from? If you have a godless universe in which there is no ultimate judgment, the Harvey Weinsteins and Larry Nassars of the world are actually as good as it gets. Yes, tens, and tens of lives bruised and battered along the way, but at least the justice system is getting to have its say. What about the Jimmy Saviles of this world? In his own lifetime, a legend, enjoying public praise and adoration, huge wealth, awarded an OBE, knighted, died a hero, 4,000 people flanked his funeral. What about the countless broken lives that only emerged in his wake? What about those of us who never had our day in court and never will? Where do we go with our longing for justice, and where do we go with our pain? Some time back, a good friend of mine told me that one of the key roles of leadership, whether it's self-leadership, whether it's the leading of many thousands of people, a key part is, as a starting point, to see reality as it really is. That's where it starts. To see reality as it really is. No good, no evil, nothing intrinsically just or unjust. I wonder, is that really the truth of the matter? Is that what reality is? I have found it a point of striking resonance that the New Testament talks, and I'm quoting from the book of 1 Peter, of the pain of unjust suffering as an intrinsic reality. The pain of unjust suffering. Where does that leave us? It's not really the high point of a talk that you want to end the evening on. We can all go home now. The pain of unjust suffering. If this is reality, if there are intrinsic injustices in the mix, and suffering and evil that is deep and real and true, that's more than just the tussle of weak and strong playing it out in an evolutionary process, then what's the answer to that? What's the solution? How do we make sense of this? Do we fight? Do we retaliate? Do we have some kind of system overthrow? Elsewhere in the Bible, it speaks so consistently and so profoundly of working for justice and righteousness. That means well-being, goodness, and peace. But here in this passage, I'll read it to you in a moment, as it talks about the pain of unjust suffering. The same passage goes on, almost zeroes in like a crescendo, to offer us somewhat of a perplexing answer as key. It says, for Christ suffered for you. What's the answer to unjust suffering? Christ suffered for you, leaving you an example that you should follow in his steps. He committed no sin, and no deceit was found in his mouth. When they hurled their insults at him, he did not retaliate. When he suffered, he made no threats. Instead, he entrusted himself to him, and now referring to God, to him who judges justly, God the Father. He himself bore our sins in his body on the cross, so that we might die to sins and live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. I don't know if any of you would have been aware of the Dove Beauty campaign that was launched in 2013. At the center of the campaign was a 3-minute video. And in the video, there was a forensic artist sitting behind a kind of a curtain, a veil he couldn't see. And a group of women came into the room, and one by one they came in, and they described themselves, their own face, their own reflection, to the artist, who then drew their image based on their own description. And then the women meet each other, they're all strangers to each other, and then they take turns to go in pairs, and one woman describes this stranger that she's just met, also to the forensic artist, who draws a second picture based on the description of one woman of the other. And at the end of the little video, each of the women are presented with 2 drawings of themselves, one based on their own description of their appearance and one based on the description of this stranger woman that they've just met. And much to their amazement and delight, the women realize that the drawings based on the descriptions of the women about themselves, as in the stranger, the friend they've just met, depict much more beautiful women than their own self-perception, their own descriptions of their own face. And the video ends with this wonderful tagline, you are more beautiful than you think. Very appealing idea, isn't it? Not just that we would be more beautiful than we would think, which I would love, but that we would be so humble and so modest as to not even realize just how beautiful we are. You are more beautiful than you think. Unfortunately, though, I don't want to offer any false hope for anyone out there. It simply isn't true. In fact, it's the exact opposite. Psychological studies show us that most of us tend to think of ourselves as better than we are, not just physically, but in every spectrum. We overestimate ourselves intellectually, psychologically, ethically, and physically. Writing for the magazine Scientific American, Oscar Adesoy writes this brilliant summary. Most people believe they are above average, a statistical impossibility. One of the things that has always struck me about the Christian faith is that it's the great leveler. When we think about suffering, when we think about injustice, the problem is always out there somewhere. The God of the Bible challenges us to a much more complex and much more sober reality. You'll have heard of Alexander Solzhenitsyn and his book, The Gulag Archipelago. It's his memoirs, his writings really about the Soviet forced labor camps and about his own experiences in the Gulag. And he writes this idea of good people and bad people. If only it were so simple. If only there were evil people somewhere insidiously committing evil deeds, and it was necessary only to separate them from the rest of us and destroy them. But the line between good and evil cuts through the heart of every human being, and who is willing to destroy a piece of his own heart. How do we do justice to the reality of who we actually are? Not caricatures, not simple, not straightforward, but complex, messy mixtures of both agent, perpetrator, and victim. Is it possible that we need in equal measure forgiveness and healing? This is why I found the cross of Christ compelling. It has addressed me as both agent and victim. Every single thing that has been done against another at anywhere across the ages, every single thing that has been done against has been witnessed. No matter how little, how secret, however hidden away, it has been witnessed by a God who, in the words of the passage we just read, judges justly. This is good news to me. I don't know if it's good news to you. I don't know if you have experiences where hidden away somewhere, whether to you or to a loved one, something was done and you want to know it was witnessed. The God who judges justly saw this. And then, of course, there's the rub. Every single thing that we have done has been witnessed to. Is it possible that true justice is much more complex, much more self-implicating than we would have liked? That's why the Psalms record the question, Lord, if you kept a record of wrongs, who could stand? Which of us could stand? The cross tells us that God refuses to turn a blind eye. But just as we were about to say, well, it's true, we're all implicated, we're all tainted, there's nothing we can do about that now. There's no getting out of this broken system. The psalmist goes on to write these words on which all of human destiny relies. Lord, if you kept a record of wrongs, which of us could stand? But with you, there is forgiveness. With you, there is forgiveness. Maybe you're watching this and you're thinking, well, you didn't come here thinking, I need forgiveness. Or maybe you're here and you think you've done something unforgivable. The cross brushes both lies, and lies they are, aside. Christ bore our evils in his body on the cross. experiencing the full judgment of God, and an offer is being made. We're being told the just God is going to take injustice seriously. But we can pay for it ourselves, or we can trust in Jesus who already did. He's offering us forgiveness. Put your trust in Jesus. Take on his life as he has taken on your death. And going forward, live in him. That's the appeal. That's the appeal of the cross. Going forward, live in him. The cross takes us seriously as agents. The cross speaks to us as victims too. Isaiah, pointing to Jesus dying on the cross, says that he carried our sorrows. What a profound thought. He carried our sorrows. I don't know if any of you have read C.S. Lewis's book, A Grief Observed. Do yourselves a favour and read it. It is absolutely phenomenal. He wrote A Problem of Pain when he was dealing with the intellectual, kind of grappling the intellectual question of pain and suffering in the world. But he wrote A Grief Observed when his wife Joy died of cancer and he was processing the pain. It's raw and very vivid. And he talks in it about this idea of somebody carrying somebody else's pain. The comment we often make to each other, oh, someone you really love, you say, I wish I could take that for you. I wish I could take that pain instead of you. And he talks about how he keeps thinking of his wife and saying, I wish I could have borne that instead of her. And he writes this. And then one babbles, if only I could bear it, or the worst of it, or any of it instead of her. But one can't tell how serious the bid is, for nothing is staked on it. If it suddenly became a possibility, then for the first time we should discover how seriously we had meant it. But is it ever allowed? It was allowed to one, Christ on the cross. And I find I can now believe again that he has done vicariously whatever can be done. He replies to our babble, you cannot and dare not. I could and dared. He carried our sorrows. But this is more than empathy on offer. The verses I just read at the beginning go on to say, by his wounds you are healed. Christ on the cross dealt with the root of our predicament, our moral brokenness, and in so doing took up and bore the brokenness of our suffering and injustice, and in so doing overcame and defeated it. And he's offering us now forgiveness and healing. Forgiveness and healing. I don't know what your individual journeys will have been as you find yourself listening in on this talk. Maybe you're a Christian, maybe you're not. Maybe when you've thought about the Christian faith, you've thought about it, or maybe as you've experienced what you thought was the Christian faith, you've experienced it as a tag-on. If you think about a house and you're a house, maybe you thought the Christian faith is like doing minor renovations around the outside, maybe painting the walls or fixing a few broken windows. You've got the imagery all wrong. To become a Christian is to understand yourself as being fully seen, fully known, soberly judged, unequivocally forgiven, on the journey of healing and being radically transformed. Fully seen, fully known, soberly judged, unequivocally forgiven, on the journey of healing and being radically transformed, and through that process empowered to take your God-given role in bringing justice to this world. The imagery is a C.S. Lewis one, you can tell I'm a fan. You thought you were being made into a decent little cottage, he writes. But he, God, is building a palace. He intends to come and live in it himself. Do you know that forgiveness? Do you know that healing? And do you know what it is to be transformed by Christ living in you? Not as a tag-on, as if that was even possible, but Christ is the center, Christ is the whole, Christ is life itself. That's the offer. In just a second, we're going to stop. We're going to have a chance to discuss some of these themes. There's so much more, of course, that could be said about justice. How do we go about fighting for justice? How do we not burn out in the process of the biggest phenomena of our time, burn out or give out? How do we really pursue this? How do we grab hold of this? We can pick it up in the Q&A. But for now, I just want to give an opportunity for us to respond. Now, there's nothing weird about this, but in a moment I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. But before I do that, let me explain what we're going to do. An offer is being made on the cross. It's an offer of relationship with the person of Christ. An offer of a radical transformation. Really, it's very simple. There are very few options on the table in terms of a response to that offer. You can say yes, you can say no, or you can say maybe. Yes, I'd like to start that journey. Yes, I need forgiveness. Yes, I desperately need healing. Yes, I want that transformation. Yes, I want to be in that relationship with God. Or no, I definitely don't want any of the above. Or maybe I don't know enough about it. I feel like you're asking me to marry you before we've gone on a date. These are the options. For some of you, you've been on this journey for a while, and actually you want to say yes, and you just want to say yes tonight. I'm going to give you that option in a second. So I'm going to ask everyone to close your eyes. There's nothing weird about this. It's just to give each other the privacy, the dignity of a space to respond. And I'm going to ask you if you're here, and actually this is a part of a journey for you, and even tonight you don't know everything about this, you don't understand everything about this, but you know you want to say yes to Jesus, yes to that journey, yes to forgiveness, yes to healing, yes to that transformation. Then I want you, every eye is closed, I can see, but obviously no one else can. If you want to just put your hand up, just to say to me, yes, I want this. I'm going to give you literally 5 seconds. Okay, thank you, I can see it. Great, thank you. I'm going to give you 2 more seconds. Great, thank you. I'm just going to pray for us, and then we'll get into a discussion, and then we'll do Q&A. Father, thank you for each person in this room. Thank you for the journeys that we've been on. Thank you for the space to talk about such important themes, justice, suffering in this world, and a discussion about how we might be part of it, but most importantly, how you answer our cries for justice. And Father, for those of us who've said tonight in our hearts and in our actions, I do want to start this journey. I don't know everything about that, but I want to say yes to Jesus. And I'd like to have a conversation. Lord, I just pray for those people that even now as we're sitting here, you would begin the process of encountering them, that they would know your forgiveness, that they would know your healing, and they would know the privilege and the joy of that radical transformation, Christ in us, the hope of glory. In the name of Jesus, amen. If that was you, there are some of you, then feel free to come and chat to me afterwards or speak to somebody you came with, continue the conversation, but we're going to have just a few minutes of a break, discuss amongst yourselves, and then we'll do Q&A. Thanks so much.